Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be here back in Athens for Reimagine Tourism Summit. I was actually here at the very first one 2 years ago. Very excited to be back. And today I'll be talking to you about data. Very exciting just before lunch. We at WTTC have been measuring the economic impact of travel and tourism across 185 economies for over 30 years. And more recently, we have also started measuring environmental and social impact of travel worldwide. Just before I move on to the findings of our latest figures and research, just about WTTC. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a membership-based organization. The members are the CEOs and chairs of the world's leading travel and tourism companies. We cover all industries of the sector as well as all regions of the world. And firstly, I'll be looking at the global figures. Looking at 2024. 2024 was a record-breaking year for the sector, despite the challenging geopolitical and economic conditions. Here you can see 4 indicators that we are measuring. First one is looking at travel and tourism's contribution to GDP, which covers sector's direct impact, indirect impact through the supply chain, as well as induced impact. We're also looking at sector's jobs, international and domestic spending, and a number of other indicators as well. Now, firstly, looking at GDP contribution, our sector was responsible for 10% of global GDP, which means that $1 in $10 globally came from our sector. When looking at jobs, similarly, 1/10 of all jobs globally are supported by travel and tourism, just under 360 million jobs. Across all 4 indicators, we saw a strong rise year-on-year last year, and we also saw volumes exceeding the pre-pandemic levels, except for international spending, which was still slightly below the 2019 level. Now, looking at 2025, which is still the forecast for this year, again, we are seeing strong performance across all 4 indicators, and for the first time since 2019, international spending is set to improve on the pre-pandemic levels. We're also projecting 10 years into the future, and the future looks bright. Travel and tourism's contribution to GDP is set to rise at 3.5% on average each year for the next decade, nearly double the growth rate of the overall economy, for the total of $16.5 trillion. When we're looking at jobs, we project 91 million new jobs to be created by our sector in the next decade, for a total of 462 million. And just some other interesting facts from our research. Travel and tourism in 2024 was the fastest growing sector worldwide, and is set to remain the fastest growing this year as well. When we look at regional performance, all regions exceeded the pre-pandemic levels when it comes to GDP contribution. The strongest performance in 2024 was in the Caribbean and the Middle East. However, this year, Asia Pacific is set to see the strongest year-on-year growth. However, not everything is as rosy as it seems. There are challenges, particularly when it comes to labor and skills. And we have recently launched our paper on the future of work in travel, looking at opportunities as well as challenges when it comes to workforce. But first, just some of the context. Travel and tourism was devastated by COVID-19. In 2020 alone, 70 million travel and tourism jobs were destroyed. And then when businesses were ready to hire again, they were struggling to find employees. And even now, when employment is back to the pre-pandemic levels, many businesses are struggling to fill vacancies. For example, when it comes to hospitality, there is a shortage of chefs and also housekeeping staff, for instance. One challenge, which is specific to more developed and mature economies, is that aging and declining working age populations is putting a pressure on available labor supply. And that's in addition to already low unemployment rates. Also globally, travel and tourism growth is outstripping the overall economy and the available labor supply. We're also seeing a fast rise of technology and AI. And we conducted a survey which shows that digital literacy is a key skill to possess amongst the employees in order for them to thrive in the future. Now, back to some of the figures again. We conducted the analysis looking at demand and supply projections for labor for the next decade. And the results are alarming. We expect to see 43 million vacancies by 2035, representing a 16% gap between demand and supply. And of those 43 million, 20 million are for low-skilled positions. Whilst these are challenges, they're also opportunities. And we can tap into those opportunities by employing more youth, as well as retaining the current employees by providing clear promotion pathways and leadership opportunities. Also, there needs to be an improvement and alignment between business and academia as well. Now, measuring economic impact is no longer enough. We have to focus on measuring broader impacts, including environmental and social impact. And over the last few years, we started measuring, you can see on this slide, a number of indicators on the environmental front, looking at things like greenhouse gas emissions from travel, looking at water use, water footprint. We're looking at air pollution, energy use. And on the social side, we are now segmenting employment by age, wage, and gender. All these indicators are aligned with Sustainable Development Goals. And what this data allows us to do is it allows us to measure the status quo, and also it helps us to determine where policy action is needed the most. And some of the results from our latest research, we have just released this a few weeks ago. So looking at carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions from travel, in 2024, our sector was responsible for 7.3% of all global emissions. That's down from 8.3% in 2019. And this is the movement in the right direction. We're also seeing, whilst travel and tourism economic impact is rising, you can see here by 6% versus 2019, greenhouse gas emissions are going down. We're seeing decoupling. We're decoupling economic growth from environmental footprint. And again, this is movement in the right direction, as well as the uptake of low carbon energy. But this is not enough. We have to amplify and improve our initiatives and the policy in order to reach net zero by 2030 and 2050. Our data also allows us to look at which industries contribute the most to greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see here, unsurprisingly, transportation comes as a #1 source with 40%. And this includes not only international transport, but also domestic transport, like road transportation, domestic aviation, and also transportation within the supply chain. Then the second most polluting industry is utilities. And what this data really helps us to do is determine where policy action is needed the most. So we have to increase the production of sustainable aviation fuels, and we have to make our grids greener. Our sector contributes positively to social impact, and our data supports this. When looking at youth employment in the sector, our sector employs a higher share of youth at 16% than the overall economy with 14%, which means we are providing opportunities for younger generations. When we're looking at female employment in the sector, the shares in broader economy and in travel and tourism are broadly similar. And last but not least, very importantly, we are contributing $3.5 trillion through the tax revenues, 1/10 of global government revenues. And these are the revenues which are used for infrastructure improvements, healthcare, etc., which benefits not only our sector, but also broader economy. Now, looking at Greece and also some of the EU figures. In 2024, looking at Greece, 20%, nearly 20% of Greek economy was supported by travel and tourism. This is nearly double the share of the EU at 10.1%. In both Greece and the EU, we saw a return to the pre-pandemic levels in terms of GDP contribution. And looking at some of the forecasts for 2025, we are seeing a continued rise of GDP in both Greece and the EU. Now looking at employment, also similar to GDP, in Greece, 1/5 of all employment was supported by our sector, again, nearly double the share of the European Union. In Greece, you can see nearly 0.9 million jobs were supported by travel. And similar to GDP, 2025 for jobs is said to be a great and, in fact, a record-breaking year for both Greece and the European Union. Now, projecting 10 years into the future, we are seeing just under 2% increase on average each year when it comes to GDP for Greece and the EU, for the total in Greece for just over $60 billion. When we're looking at jobs, again, you can see here 174,000 new jobs are set to be created in the Greek economy by our sector for the total of just 1.1 million, for over just 1.1 million. International visitor spending is key to many economies globally, and particularly for Southern European countries. So here on this, it's not actually working, it's not strong enough, sorry. Thought I could point. So you can see here, bars in blue represent a share of spending that comes from international spending, and the amber bars shows the performance in 2024 versus the pre-pandemic levels. And you can see for a number of Southern European countries, they are much more reliant on international spending than the world average. Looking at Greece specifically, 67% of all spending comes from international tourists. Also, we saw a strong recovery when it comes to international spending in a number of these countries. In Greece, international spending was still slightly below the 2019 levels. But 2025, you can see here, we expect international spending in Greece to reach $28 billion with a strong annual growth of 11% and a strong recovery over the pre-pandemic levels. Now, I already mentioned when it came to global challenges, workforce challenges. And here we also conducted the analysis for a number of countries. And we expect shortages for all countries we analyzed, for all 20 economies. When it comes to absolute terms, China, India, and the EU are set to see the largest vacancies over the next decade. In Greece, we expect 290,000 vacancies by 2035, a very significant number, which is also the opportunity, of course. When we look at relative terms, you can see here Japan, Greece, and Germany being at the top. Looking at Greece specifically, 27% of demand is set to be unfulfilled by 2035. That's a very significant number. Some of the reasons why these vacancies are occurring is because the aging population is having an impact on the available labor supply, and also strong tourism growth is outstripping overall economy and the available labor supply. Now again, so here I'm looking at the economic impact versus environmental impact. We are bringing both together. At the global level, we are seeing the decoupling, which I mentioned in one of my previous slides. It means that economic growth is being decoupled from the environmental impact. And the same holds true for all economies in Southern Europe, or for the majority. We are seeing strong growth in travel and tourism GDP, but the emissions are rising at a slower pace, or they're seeing the absolute decrease in some of these economies, including in Greece. Now moving on to the social impact of travel and tourism in Greece. Again, it is positive news, particularly when looking at youth employment. Travel and tourism in Greece employs a higher share of youth than the overall economy, which means Greece is providing opportunities for younger generations. We're seeing female employment share in travel being similar to the overall economy. And also here we can see again the contribution to tax from travel and tourism, which is reaching just over 20 billion US dollars. Again, this is being used for infrastructure improvements, healthcare, benefiting not just travel, but the overall economy. And with increasing travel volumes, there are some challenges. One of them is being overcrowding. And there are a few points I want to make here. The first one being, it's not a universal issue. It is time and space specific. And we recently launched Call to Action with our members, which challenges the oversimplification of overcrowding. Overcrowding sometimes, people think it's basically the fault of travel and tourism, but it's also poor governance, it's poor urban planning, it is chronic infrastructure. All of these elements are having an impact on overcrowding. And some of the measures we are seeing are taxes and levies. And what we have done is we have run the counterfactual analysis looking at what would happen to tourism in 11 European hotspots if tourism volumes were curtailed. And you can see here alarming figures, 245 billion lost in GDP in these destinations and 3 million lost in jobs. And as a result, what we argue for, we're arguing for a more constructive approach to overcrowding, which engages local community and builds on positive impact of travel rather than tearing it down. Just to recap, the data shows that travel and tourism contributes positively to local economies and many livelihoods around the world. And there are challenges, but with the right forward planning and by investing in people, technology, skills, nature preservation, we can ensure that our sector remains resilient and future ready. I'll pause here. Thank you so much for your attention.